Beth's icy glare was more than enough to convey her fury as we drove away from the evening gathering hosted by our friends, Lisa and Joe. Seated as far from me as possible in the car, her arms were folded tightly, her expression sharp enough to sour milk. The reason for her anger? Well, it was entirely justified, given how I had managed to spoil the evening spectacularly. It all started with a misunderstood tradition at Lisa and Joe's parties, a tradition Beth embraced wholeheartedly, though I was clueless until it was almost too late. After a decade of marriage, it seemed Beth had omitted to mention that these gatherings ended with a peculiar twist. Each wife would drop her house keys into a communal bowl, and the husbands would then draw a key to determine who they'd spend the night with. As the realization dawned upon me at the party's climax, my world tilted. Anger surged through me, mixed with a betrayal I couldn't immediately voice. In a heated whisper, I confronted Beth in the corner of their lavish living room. "Did you know about this key game?" I hissed, unable to keep my voice steady. With a shrug that seemed too casual, Beth replied, "Of course, but I knew you'd never come if I told you." "That's because it's insane, Beth. How could you think I'd be okay with this?" My voice rose, a mixture of incredulity and pain threading through the words. She countered coolly, "It's just one night, Mark. It could spice things up." "I don't want spice like this." My response was immediate, visceral. "We're leaving, now." Beth resisted, arguing it would be rude to leave early, but I was adamant. The drive home was a blur of silence and simmering tension, each of us entrenched in our personal turmoil. Upon arriving, the cold air between us begged for warmth that neither of us knew how to provide. "Mark, we need to talk about this," Beth said softly, her voice a stark contrast to the steel in her eyes from earlier. I nodded, weary but aware that avoiding the depth of our issues would only deepen the chasm. "Yes, we do. Let's try to understand each other, not just react." As we settled into an uneasy truce, attempting to navigate through our tangled emotions, it became clear that this night would be a long one, filled with hard conversations. But perhaps necessary for what lay ahead in our marriage. Beth's fury was palpable as we drove home from Lisa and Joe Parker's party, her icy glare slicing through the tension. "You're insufferable," she hissed, furious over the scene I had caused. "How could you embarrass me like that? We'll never be invited back." "Embarrass you," I retorted, feeling the sting of her words. "You didn't think I'd be embarrassed to find out you planned to sleep with another man tonight." Her response was quick and cutting. "Well, you could have picked another woman. We both might have enjoyed ourselves." "I don't want another woman, Beth. I've been faithful and I'm disgusted to learn you want someone else," I said, the weight of her betrayal sinking in. "It would only be once, Mark. Just one night out of all the nights we've shared. That's not much to ask, is it?" "It's a lot to ask," I countered, pulling the car over abruptly. The gravity of her request hung between us like a thick fog. In a moment of fury, I made a sharp U-turn and sped back toward the Parkers' house. Beth yelped in surprise as I announced, "If it's that important to you, then go ahead." "I won't stop you." As we screeched to a halt in front of the house, Beth's face drained of color. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm saying you can go ahead and join them. Go find someone to give you what I apparently can't," I spat out, the bitterness evident in my tone. "It's just an adventure, Mark. Something different," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "You're perfect, but I need this." "Well, I don't want any part of it," I declared firmly. "If you go through with this, it's over between us." Beth hesitated, her hand on the door handle. "Can you pick me up in the morning?" she asked, a note of hope in her voice. "Number, I'm sure whoever you end up with will be happy to take you wherever you need to go," I replied coldly. Her expression soured. "You make it sound so dirty, Mark. It's not like that." "It's exactly like that, Beth. You're about to spend the night with a stranger." She sighed, resigned. "It's just one night. It's not a big deal. Even 1 second would be too much, I said firmly. If you go through with this, we're done. You're overreacting, Mark. I'll be yours again in the morning, and you'll forget all about this. No, Beth. If you walk back into that house, I'll never want you again. That won't happen, Mark. We're married. We'll get through this, she argued. I shook my head. If you go in, it's over. After a tense moment, Beth opened the door. See you in the morning, Mark, she said with a defiant smile. No, you won't, I whispered as I drove away, leaving her standing in the driveway, stunned. I hoped she'd call, admit she was wrong and ask me to come back. But she never did. As I drove, tears filled my eyes. Beth had chosen a stranger over me, over our marriage. I remembered my father's words. If a woman is seriously considering sleeping with another man, she's already crossed the line. It hit me then. My marriage was over. The real tragedy was our 3 children, Natalie, Emma, and Mark Jr. How could I go on without seeing them every day? The kids were at my mum's for the weekend, giving me time to think. I drove around aimlessly, still hoping Beth would call and ask me to pick her up. But as the minutes ticked by, it became painfully clear that she had made her decision. Finally, I headed home. As I pulled into the driveway, my phone rang. It was Ted Mason from the party. Hey, Mark, Beth gave me your number. She's really hoping you'll come back. It's going to be unforgettable tonight, he urged. I hung up, the finality of the situation sinking in. There was no going back. The night had changed everything. As I sat in the dimly lit motel room, the hum of the old air conditioner blending with the distant sounds of nighttime traffic, I struggled to reconcile the Beth I knew with the woman who had left that voicemail. Her words echoed in my mind, a jarring reminder of the chasm that had opened up between us. Mark, you're acting like a child, her recorded voice scolded, the casual dismissal of our vows stinging me anew. It's just one night, Mark. I'll let one guy have me for a few hours, and it doesn't make me immoral. The pain and betrayal churned inside me, fueled by her nonchalance about the ordeal. She had chosen Brian for the night, a man who was, by her own admission, married with kids. How could she be so flippant about something so sacred as our marriage? I tried to focus on the television, but the flickering images were a blur. Instead, I found myself staring at the torn pieces of our marriage certificate and the flattened wedding ring on the small table beside my bed. Symbols of a bond I thought unbreakable, now just fragments of a life I could no longer grasp. My phone lit up again, another call from Beth. This time, I answered, my voice cold and distant. What do you want, Beth? Mark, please, just listen, she pleaded, her voice softer now, tinged with something that sounded like regret. I didn't realize how much this would hurt you. I thought it might spice things up, remind us of what we have. What we had, Beth, I corrected her sharply. You made your choice. How can you expect me to just accept this, to wait for you like nothing happened? There was a pause on the line, heavy with unsaid words. I'm sorry, Mark. I really am. I just thought... You thought wrong. I cut her off, my voice rising despite my attempt to control it. You chose a night of adventure over our family. You can't undo that. Mark, I love you. I'll come home tomorrow. We can talk. There's nothing left to discuss, I said, a finality in my voice I hardly recognized. You should stay with Brian. Maybe he can give you what I apparently can't. The line went silent, and I hung up before she could respond. Lying back on the bed, I stared at the ceiling, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. Was I being too harsh? Or was it necessary, a boundary that needed to be drawn? Sleep eluded me as I wrestled with these thoughts. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I couldn't stay in that motel room any longer, wallowing in my sorrow. I needed to face the future, whatever it might hold. I packed my few belongings and checked out, driving aimlessly at first, then gradually steering the car towards my brother's house. He had always been a source of support, and I hoped he could offer some guidance now. As I pulled into his driveway, the early morning light casting long shadows on the lawn, I felt a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to rebuild, to forge a new path from the wreckage of my broken heart. I rang the doorbell, and my brother answered, his face etched with concern. "Mark, what happened?" I sighed, stepping inside, ready to share the tale of a night that had changed everything, knowing that this was the first step toward healing and perhaps, eventually, forgiveness. The dawn was breaking as I left the motel, the early morning light doing little to lift the weight of betrayal that hung heavy on my heart. I drove aimlessly, the landscape blurring past as I wrestled with the storm of emotions churning inside me. Beth's words haunted me, each replay adding fuel to the fire of my anguish. She had chosen her desires over our vows, and that was something I wouldn't just let pass. I needed clarity, a plan, something to guide me through the wreckage of our shattered marriage. I ended up at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. The place was nearly empty, save for a few early risers murmuring over their morning brew. I ordered a coffee and found a secluded corner where I could gather my thoughts away from curious eyes. As I sipped the bitter drink, my phone vibrated with a new voicemail from Beth. I hesitated but played it. "Mark, please, I didn't think it would go this far. I'm sorry, can we just talk about this?" Her voice was shaky, filled with a plea for understanding that I wasn't ready to give. I deleted the message and turned off my phone, unwilling to hear any more excuses. It was time to take action, to ensure I came out of this debacle with something resembling dignity, if not happiness. First, I needed legal counsel. Mississippi's laws were clear on adultery, and I intended to use them to my advantage. I called a few contacts, and by mid-morning, I had an appointment with a reputable lawyer in town. Sitting across from Mr. Jameson, I explained the situation, omitting nothing. He listened intently, nodding along before laying out my options. "Given the circumstances, you have a strong case for divorce on the grounds of adultery. This could indeed influence both the custody of your children and the financial settlements." "Thank you, Mr. Jameson," I said, feeling a sliver of control returning. "I want to make sure my children are protected above all. I can't have them growing up thinking this behavior is acceptable." He assured me he would handle the case with the sensitivity and urgency it required. As I left his office, I felt a plan forming, a path forward out of the chaos. I drove to my mum's house next. The kids would be waking up soon, and I needed to see them, to assure myself they were okay. Mum greeted me at the door, her expression a mix of concern and anger. "How are you holding up?" she asked, pulling me into a hug. "It's hard, Mum, but I saw the kids. They're still oblivious to everything, thankfully," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. We talked for a while, discussing the next steps and how to handle the situation with the kids. Mum agreed to keep them for a few more days until things settled. "They're safe here with me. You sort this out, Mark. Make sure that woman doesn't drag you down any further." Leaving Mum's house, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about reclaiming my life and securing my children's future. Beth had made her choice, and now I was making mine. Over the next few weeks, the divorce proceedings moved quickly thanks to Mr. Jameson's expertise. The evidence of Beth's infidelity, coupled with Mississippi's laws, swayed the case decidedly in my favor. I was granted full custody of the children, with Beth having supervised visits until we could reassess her role in their lives. As I picked up Natalie, Emma, and Mark Jr. from Mum's house, their smiles were a bittersweet reminder of the family life we had lost. But I was determined to build something new, something solid from the ruins Beth had left behind. This was a fresh start, not just for me, but for my children too. We were moving forward, one step at a time, toward a future where trust and love were the foundations of our home. After the phone call with Beth, I felt an unsettling mix of anger and confusion as I entered the diner. The aroma of coffee and fried eggs did little to ease the turmoil inside me. Settling into a booth by the window, I tried to process her words, her plea for understanding something I found utterly reprehensible. Beth had confessed to needing to feel desired, to be seen as more than just a wife and mother. She argued it was just physical, a fleeting moment of madness. But to me, it was a betrayal that cut to the core of our marriage vows. The fact that she found such exhilaration in another's arms, laughing and screaming with joy, was more than I could bear. As I sipped my coffee, looking out at the quiet morning street, I pondered over the years we had spent together. Had I been so blind to her needs? I thought about our date nights, the little surprises, and all the ways I tried to show my love and desire for her. Yet, it seemed none of it had been enough. The waitress brought over my breakfast, pulling me momentarily from my thoughts. I thanked her mechanically, my appetite lost in the sea of my swirling emotions. Eating mechanically, my mind raced with what to do next. The idea of divorce, once unthinkable, now seemed the only viable path forward. Mississippi law was clear on the consequences of adultery, and I intended to ensure that Beth's actions didn't go without repercussions. I needed to protect not only my own emotional well-being, but also the future of our children. After breakfast, I walked back to my car, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on me. I dialed the number of a well-known divorce attorney in town, known for his tough, no-nonsense approach. The call went through, and I was greeted by a firm, professional voice. "Good morning, this is Jameson Law. How can I assist you?" the secretary asked. "Hi, I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Jameson. It's regarding a divorce case," I responded, my voice steadier than I felt. "Certainly," she replied, sensing the urgency in my voice. "We can have you in today if you're available. Mr. Jameson had a cancellation this morning." "Thank you, that would be perfect," I said, grateful for the swift response. Driving to the law office, I prepared mentally for the meeting. It wasn't just about legally ending the marriage, it was about safeguarding my rights and securing a stable future for my children. The thought of the upcoming legal battle was daunting but necessary. Mr. Jameson greeted me in his office, a room lined with legal books and framed certificates. After I explained the situation, he listened intently, occasionally nodding or jotting down notes. "We'll make sure that the proceedings are handled with your best interests in mind, particularly concerning the custody of your children," Mr. Jameson assured me after I had finished. "Infidelity significantly impacts these cases, and we'll use this to your advantage." Leaving his office, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that I was taking steps to address the situation, and profound sadness at the realization that the marriage I had cherished was truly over. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with emotional and legal challenges, but necessary for healing and moving forward. As I drove away, I thought about the future, about rebuilding and finding a new sense of normal for myself and my children. Despite the pain, I knew we had the resilience to overcome this. The journey would be long, but it would lead us to a better place. After a long, restless night filled with turmoil, I woke up early the next morning with a resolve to face the challenges ahead. The first item on my agenda was to find a reputable lawyer who could guide me through the divorce proceedings. I made several calls and scheduled a consultation with a well-respected attorney in town known for handling complex family law cases. Driving to the lawyer's office, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain the unraveling of a decade-long marriage in a few concise sentences. Mr. Allen, the attorney, greeted me with a professional nod, and we got straight to business. "I understand this is a difficult time," Mr. Allen began, "but I assure you we'll handle your case with the utmost sensitivity and confidentiality." I nodded, thankful for his straightforward demeanor. I laid out the facts, Beth's infidelity, the audio evidence, our children, and my utmost priority to ensure their well-being throughout the process. Mr. Allen listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "Given the evidence you have, We have a strong case for divorce on the grounds of adultery, which is taken very seriously here in Mississippi, he explained. This will significantly affect the custody arrangement and possibly the division of assets. Leaving the office, I felt a weight lift slightly, knowing I had taken the first steps toward legal resolution. But the emotional resolution was far from over. I needed to see my children to assure them that their father was still there for them, regardless of the tumult at home. I drove to my mother's house where the kids were staying. The joy on their faces when they saw me was a balm to my aching heart. We spent the day playing in the backyard, their laughter a temporary escape from the chaos. "Daddy, when is Mommy coming to see us?" my youngest, Mark Jr., asked during our picnic lunch. I struggled to find words that would make sense to a 4-year-old. "Mommy is dealing with some grown-up stuff right now, buddy, but she loves you very much," I assured him, forcing a smile. As we played, my phone buzzed incessantly. Beth was calling, likely realizing the gravity of our situation. I ignored the calls, focusing instead on the innocent joy of our children, who were blissfully unaware of the storm around them. That evening, after tucking the kids into bed at my mum's, I sat on her porch, the night air cool and soothing. My mother joined me, handing me a cup of tea. "She called here," Mum said gently. "She's a mess, Mark. Says she wants to try to make things right." I sipped the tea, considering her words. "I don't see how we can go back, Mum. What she did. It's not just that she was unfaithful, it's that she doesn't even seem to understand why it's such a betrayal." Mum nodded, understanding the pain in my voice. "You need to do what's best for you and those kids. If that means moving forward without her, then so be it." That night, after a long conversation filled with motherly advice and reassurance, I felt more determined. The next day would bring its own challenges, but I was ready to face them head on. The journey through divorce would be difficult, but I knew that with the support of my family and a good lawyer, I would navigate through this storm and hopefully find calmer seas for me and my children. After the meeting with Doug and Lee, I felt slightly more prepared to face the complexities of divorce, but their words also reinforced the magnitude of the decisions ahead. As I drove away from the bar, my thoughts were interrupted by a call from my attorney, Mr. Allen, reminding me of our appointment early the next morning to discuss strategies for custody and financial settlements. The next morning, fortified by a strong cup of coffee and a clearer sense of purpose, I walked into Mr. Allen's office. He greeted me with a folder of documents already spread out on his desk. "Good morning, Mark. Let's get straight to it," he began, adjusting his glasses. "Based on your concerns about custody and given Beth's current state, we need to discuss the best approach to ensure you play a significant role in your children's lives." We dove into the details, analyzing every financial document and potential legal angle we could use. Mr. Allen emphasized the importance of documenting everything: Beth's infidelity, her emotional state, and any interactions that might help our case. "Custody battles can get messy, Mark, but your steady income and emotional stability will play in your favor," he advised. "We'll need to demonstrate that while you're seeking full custody, you're also advocating for Beth's involvement under terms that ensure the children's well-being." Feeling a bit overwhelmed but also armed with legal strategies, I left the office ready to face whatever came next. My phone rang. It was my mum checking in. "Hi, Mum. The kids okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're fine, honey. They miss you and Beth. Have you talked to her since?" she inquired gently. I sighed. "Not since the other night. She's called, but I haven't been ready to talk." "Mark, she's their mother. Whatever happens between you two, don't let it poison their love for her," Mum advised, her voice full of concern. "I know, Mum. I'm trying. It's just hard," I replied, the frustration evident in my voice. After hanging up, I decided to visit the kids. Seeing them always brought a measure of peace and perspective, no matter the chaos swirling around us. At my mum's, the kids ran into my arms, their laughter a much-needed reminder of what was at stake. We spent the afternoon playing in the backyard, their innocent joy easing some of the pain from the ongoing strife with Beth. Later, sitting on my mum's porch while the kids watched a movie inside, I reflected on the upcoming legal battles. The thought of dragging the kids through a custody fight weighed heavily on me, but I knew I had to ensure their future was secure, no matter the personal cost. As dusk turned to evening, I prepared to leave, hugging my children tightly, promising to see them soon. On the drive back, my resolve hardened. I would do whatever it took to protect them from the fallout of Beth's decisions. Back at my temporary motel room, I organized my documents and prepared notes for another meeting with Mr. Allen. The road ahead was daunting, but I was ready to fight for my children's future. I also knew I needed to confront Beth, to try and discuss the situation like adults, for the kids' sake. Tomorrow I decided I would call her. We needed to talk, not as spouses, but as co-parents. Despite everything, we had to find a way to navigate this new reality for our children. As I lay down, trying to find sleep, I knew that conversation would be one of the hardest I'd ever have to have. But it was necessary, and it was time. As the conversation with Beth wound down, the cold, biting truth settled between us. There was no turning back. Her words had solidified my resolve even further. Disconnecting the call, I sat in my car, the silence around me echoing the hollow feeling inside. The following morning, I drove to meet Sandra Simmons, the recommended family law attorney. Her office was a stark, professional space that immediately conveyed a sense of seriousness about the business at hand. Sandra greeted me with a firm handshake, her demeanor professional yet empathetic. "Mark, I've reviewed the preliminary details Doug provided. It's clear that we have a strong case given the evidence of infidelity," she began without preamble. "Mississippi law is quite straightforward about these matters. We can file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, which could significantly affect both alimony and custody." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. "What about the children?" I asked, the weight of their future pressing heavily on me. Sandra leaned back, assessing me with a keen eye. "Given your stable income and the circumstances surrounding the infidelity, we can argue convincingly for primary custody. However, it's also important to prepare for a scenario where joint custody is considered. We need to prove that having primary custody is in the best interest of the children." The meeting continued with discussions on asset protection and potential settlement strategies. Sandra was methodical, taking me through various scenarios and legal precedents that could influence our case. By the time I left her office, I felt armed with information and a clear plan. Later that day, I visited my children at my mother's house. Their innocent smiles and laughter were a stark contrast to the complexity of the divorce proceedings. I spent the afternoon playing with them in the backyard, my heart aching at the thought of the upheaval in their lives. Yet their resilience gave me strength. As the sun began to set, I talked to them about changes that might be coming, trying to explain things in a way they could understand without overwhelming them. "Sometimes Mommy and Daddy need to live apart, but we both love you very much, and that will never change," I explained gently. Leaving my mother's house that evening was difficult. The comfort of being with family made the loneliness of the motel room even more pronounced. I lay in bed that night, the weight of the day pressing down on me. The path ahead was clear, but daunting. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and consultations. Sandra proved to be an invaluable ally, guiding the process with a steady hand. Her ability to navigate the legal system reassured me, even as the emotional toll of the divorce began to wear me down. As the court date approached, I prepared myself for the finality of the proceedings. Beth and I had once vowed to support each other, but those promises were now shattered, lost to a night of indiscretion that she deemed trivial. On the morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse, taking deep breaths to steady myself. The battle for my children's future was about to begin, and I was ready to fight with everything I had. The pain of the past few months had forged a resolve in me that was unbreakable. Stepping into the courthouse, I knew that today would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Regardless of the outcome, I was determined to rebuild and provide a stable, loving environment for my children. They were my priority, and no amount of personal pain would deter me from that mission. As Beth hugged the kids, I stood there, feeling like an intruder in what used to be my home. The children were oblivious to the storm raging around them, laughing and chattering about their day with Grandma. Watching them, a pang of sorrow tugged at my heartstrings. This was supposed to be a happy family home, not a battleground. After a few moments, I cleared my throat. "Beth, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. She nodded, her face tense, and led me into the kitchen where we could speak privately. "I've filed for divorce," I began, the words heavy but necessary. "Sandra Simmons is my attorney. You'll be served soon." Beth's face paled, her eyes widening in shock. "Mark, please, can't we talk about this? Maybe see a counselor." "It's beyond that now," I replied coldly. "You made your choice that night with Brian. I begged you not to go through with it, but you did anyway." Tears started to well up in her eyes. "It was a mistake, Mark. Can't you see I regret it? I never wanted to hurt you or the kids." "Mistakes are forgotten keys or missed appointments, Beth, not sleeping with someone else," I retorted sharply. "You didn't just hurt me, you broke our family." She wiped her eyes, trying to regain composure. "What about the kids?" "They need both of us." "They'll have both of us," I assured her. "I'm not taking them away from you, but our marriage, it's over. I'll make sure the kids are okay, but as for us, there's no going back." Beth slumped into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "I can't believe this is happening." "I can't either," I said, the bitterness in my voice reflecting my pain. "But here we are. You should talk to a lawyer, Beth. Prepare yourself." With nothing left to say, I walked out, the sound of her sobs echoing behind me. The drive back to my temporary place was long and silent. I called my mum to update her on the situation and to check on the kids. She was supportive, but worried about how this would affect the children in the long run. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and arrangements. Sandra was efficient, her approach methodical and calculated. We went over custody arrangements, asset division, and potential outcomes of the divorce proceedings. She prepared me for a tough battle, especially with the evidence of Beth's infidelity potentially swaying the case in our favor. Despite the legal tumult, I made it a point to spend quality time with the kids. I explained to them, in the simplest terms possible, that Mommy and Daddy would be living apart, but our love for them would never change. They had questions, some harder to answer than others, but I did my best to assure them that both their mum and I would always be there for them. As the court date approached, nerves started to set in. Sandra reassured me that everything was in order, but the gravity of what was about to happen weighed heavily on me. This wasn't just a divorce, it was the dismantling of a life we had built together. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was cold and sterile. Beth was there, looking worn and defeated. Our eyes met briefly. The woman I had loved for over a decade looked back at me, her eyes filled with regret. The proceedings were a blur, but Sandra's voice was clear and confident as she presented our case. The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. When it was over, the sense of finality was overwhelming. Outside the courthouse, Beth approached me. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I know," I replied, the years of love and pain mingling in those two words. "Take care of yourself, Beth." Turning away, I felt the chapter closing behind me, a mix of relief and sorrow flooding through me. It was time to move forward, to rebuild and find a new path for myself and my kids. The road ahead would be difficult, but we would navigate it together, one step at a time. As Beth's voice echoed with desperation through the phone, my resolve only hardened. "The law is clear, Beth." What you did is considered infidelity, and it's grounds for divorce in Mississippi, I explained, trying to maintain a level of calmness despite the storm of emotions. I can't believe you're doing this to us, to our family, she sobbed. Can't we talk about this? See a counselor? We've moved past the point of counseling, Beth, I said, the finality in my voice mirroring the finality of my decision. You broke our trust, and no amount of therapy can undo that night. The conversation ended with Beth still pleading, but I hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. Turning off my phone to prevent further calls, I focused on preparing for the upcoming weekend with my children. They needed stability and love, especially now. Friday arrived quickly, and with it the news from Lee that the story about the wife-swapping parties was going to hit the local newspaper. He assured me that the report would be anonymous, but hinted strongly enough at the participants to raise eyebrows. It was a small victory, but it felt like a step towards holding Beth and the others accountable for their actions. The article went live earlier Friday evening, just as the children and I were finishing dinner. Curious, I checked it online, skimming through the carefully worded exposé. The journalist had done a thorough job describing the secretive nature of the gatherings without revealing specific names, but making it clear that prominent members of the community were involved. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls from various friends and neighbors asking if I had seen the news. I confirmed I had, without providing any details about my involvement. The community's reaction was a mix of shock and gossip, which was exactly what Lee's reporter friend had intended. Meanwhile, Beth was served with the divorce papers. When she called, her tone was a mix of fury and despair. "How could you expose me like this?" she accused, clearly upset about the newspaper article as well. "Beth, I didn't write the article, but I won't lie and say I'm unhappy about it," I admitted. "You and your friends made choices, and now you're facing the public consequences of those actions." "You're ruining my life," she cried. "You did that on your own, Beth. I'm just trying to protect myself and our kids," I replied, feeling a stab of pain at the harsh truth of our situation. As the weekend progressed, I spent quality time with the children at the park, trying to keep their minds off the chaos. We played games, enjoyed ice cream, and I answered their innocent questions about why Mommy and Daddy weren't living together anymore as best as I could. Their resilience amazed me, and their unconditional love bolstered my spirits. By Monday, the article had stirred up significant controversy. Several local businesses mentioned anonymously were scrambling to protect their reputations, and the community's backlash was palpable. People began distancing themselves from the Parkers and anyone else rumored to be involved. My lawyer called to update me on the divorce proceedings. "The public reaction to the scandal might sway the court's sympathy towards you, especially considering your focus on the children and maintaining their stability," she explained. "I just want what's best for them," I told her, reaffirming my commitment to making this transition as smooth as possible for my kids. As I prepared for the next hearing, I realized that despite the pain and disruption, I was moving towards a future where honesty and integrity would define the home I provided for my children. The road was tough, and the battles were far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the truth and a clear conscience. After the dust settled from the scandal and the divorce was finalized, life found a new rhythm for me and the kids. Despite the bitterness of the past, I focused on providing a stable and loving home for them during the week. Our home was filled with routine, laughter, and an occasional visit to the park after school. However, as much as I immersed myself in work and fatherhood, the loneliness of the evenings when the kids were asleep was palpable. One Friday evening, as I dropped the kids off at Beth's place, she tried once again to strike a conversation about how she was improving her life. "Mark, I've been going to counseling. I really am trying to change," she told me earnestly. I nodded, acknowledging her effort but keeping the conversation short. "That's good to hear, Beth. It's important for the kids," I replied, making it clear that while I supported her for the sake of our children, our personal chapter was closed. Returning to an empty house, I decided it was time to meet new people, perhaps make some friends who weren't connected to the painful memories of my past with Beth. Joining a local hiking group seemed like a safe bet, healthy, non-committal, and it got me out of the house. The first hike was refreshing, leading me through lush trails and alongside chattering streams that made me feel alive again. It was there I met Anna, a fellow hiker who was also going through a post-divorce phase. We found comfort in our shared experiences, laughing about the absurdities and navigating our new realities. Anna was easy to talk to, and our friendship developed naturally. We started attending more group activities together, from hiking to attending local concerts. It was nice to connect with someone who understood the challenges of starting over. One evening, after a concert in the park, Anna and I sat on a bench, sharing a bag of popcorn and talking about our dreams for the future. Sometimes I think about moving away from all this, Anna confessed. Start fresh somewhere new. I understood the sentiment. I've had those thoughts too, I admitted. But then I think about the kids and their stability. Plus, this town, for all its faults, is home. Yeah, it's the same for me. My kids love their school here, she sighed. We fell into a comfortable silence, enjoying the evening breeze. As summer turned to fall, Anna and I grew closer. It was clear there was potential for something more than friendship, but I hesitated. The scars from my marriage with Beth were still tender, and the fear of experiencing such betrayal again held me back. During a hike one crisp autumn morning, Anna stopped on the trail, turning to face me with a serious look. "Mark, I really like spending time with you," she began, "but I get the sense you're holding back. If you're not ready or interested in exploring where this could go, I understand. Just be honest with me." Her directness took me by surprise. I took a deep breath, appreciating her forthrightness. "Anna, I do like you, a lot," I started, "but I'm scared. I'm scared of getting hurt again." She nodded, taking my hands in hers. "I get it. I'm scared too. But maybe, just maybe, we could take it slow and see where things go. No pressure, no big commitments, just enjoying each other's company." Her proposal sounded like a breath of fresh air, a chance to explore something new with someone who understood the stakes. "Okay, let's take it slow," I agreed, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. As we continued our hike, I felt a spark of hope for the first time in a long time. Maybe this was the start of something good, something healing. Anna and I had a long road ahead, but for now, we had each other's company to enjoy, and that was enough.